Welcome. Welcome to Pacific Unitarian Universalist Church. Sunday service, January 10th, 2021. Well, 2020 in its spirit is holding on. We'd known it all along. It really wasn't hidden in any way. Fair elections had been named as inconveniences. We were shown over and over that truth was a road bump to be trampled more than something that would constrain behavior or talk. We were shown and told that whites in charge was more a priority than a commitment to democracy. Among the few truthful things that our president has said in his 4 years, if before he's impeached, censored, or disabled by the 25th Amendment before he leaves, is that January 6th is going to be wild. Like an addict behaving in increasingly reckless ways, this week was the worst of what we see and refer to in the word amazing. I'm going to forego announcements and light our chalice with words from Melanie Davis, whose words are this: if there were a time for a candle in the darkness, this would be it. Using the spark of hope, we are going to kindle this flame of love, ignite the light of peace, and feed the flame of justice. I'll light our chalice and introduce and invite Severin to share our opening hymn.
All right, please sing with me on number 210, Come Children of Tomorrow. Come, children of tomorrow, come, the glory dawn upon the world. The warring banners must be furled, the earth become our common home. From plain and field, the townless sound, the stirring rumor tread the common ground. Divided we have long withstood the love that is our common speech, the comrade cry of each to each is calling us to humanhood.
Thank you, Severin. I'd like anyone who's got kids at home or to come forward and join us for our children's moment. My best friend lives in Hollywood, and he is kind of a wordsmith, and he has created a game called Sounds Like, which one should listen to as Sounds Like. And in this game, two words that are very similar sounding, but with greatly different meanings are put together, and people who are learning English, one is asked to speak the word, and the other one is asked to write it. And they get points when when the writer gets it correct, because the speaker then has probably spoken it as clearly as they can. Sounds Like is a game, and this children's moment is a little bit like that. There was a girl named Amira, and Amira lived by the sea, and she was committed to the idea that for her birthday, she wanted a porpoise. Now, I have a dolphin in my hand, but it's very much like a porpoise. Porpoises are small versions of dolphins, and she loved them. And she, like the way that many kids want a cat or a horse or a dog, she asked her parents for a porpoise. But that's not what they heard her say. And I'm bringing this up because our adults, I don't know if any of your parents are doing it, but we have about 20 to 25 people on Saturday mornings for the next month working on cultivating and clarifying their purpose, not their porpoise. So when Amira went to her parents and said, I want a porpoise, her parents said, oh, you have to find a purpose for yourself. That's something you need to seek out on your own. And she was like, no, I want a porpoise. And then she went to her grandparents and she said, I want a purpose. And they said, oh, you're way too young for a purpose. Most adults don't even know what their purpose is. And she said, no, I want a porpoise. They said, oh, that's a wild animal. You can't have that, Amira, that's not something we can give you. They're crazy wild animals in the ocean. So they heard her, but she was fuming. And she said no one really understood her when she said she wanted a purpose. And that's a hard thing to explain. So one of the things that's going to pull you through life is sort of wanting or living with a sense of purpose. Now, purpose isn't wanting a thing, usually. You might want a puppy. You might even want a porpoise. But it's a funny thing to say. But you're going to probably need, as you grow older, to find a purpose. And the way that you find a purpose in the simplest of terms, one of the things you'd say, and one of the things we're talking about on these Saturday mornings, is the idea of taking what you're good at. Every one of us has a certain amount of gifts, right? Some of us are athletic, or we're particularly smart, or we're caring, or we're artistic, or we're musical, or any number of things that people particularly be gifted at. You can be gifted at a lot of different things. And probably, when you think about that, if you, speaking to see things, this is a shell that Tracy Blender got for us for the library. If you listen to yourself carefully, and you listen to what life is telling you, you can help find those things that you're very good at, and then you put those things that you're good at connected to what ways you can make a difference based on what other people need and ways you can contribute to the world. What you're good at and what's needed is a very good step to understanding what your purpose is. So for those adults who want to explain their purpose, I think there's still enough time to get in. You could email me or email Mary Ann Stein. I think we can squeeze you in. We were talking about whether there's enough time in the group. But if you're a kid, be patient with yourself, but think about what it is that you want to do and what it is that you want to let life pull you through. That's what your purpose is. And when you're struggling, as we all do, every adult, all different kinds of people, always struggle. That's one of the sad parts about life. A purpose can help you be strong, and it can help give you meaning in your life, and it can help other people as well. So, porpoise and purpose are very close. They sound a lot alike, but they're very different. So, there we are with that. And I want to invite anyone to sort of take a moment to think about the joys and concerns of those that surround you. We in this church, obviously, with numbers of us, with COVID rising, there's an always fluctuating number of dramatic figures, particularly in Los Angeles, about how many people have COVID. You know, I was back in Boston recently. I just got tested negative, thankfully. And there's obviously a great concern about spreading this very terrible thing. And let's just hold that for all the people who have COVID. We have people who work with people who are in their 40s and whose very lives are threatened. We have a lot of healthcare workers in this congregation. All of us are affected by that. So let's just take a minute in this time of great political tumult and challenges. As Tracy Blender on our worship committee meeting said on Wednesday, she said, this year has just come at us like waves, and it's really true. If you're not knocked by medical results, you're knocked by political transfers, let's just hold a place of peace and know that this place here is a place of peace in all of our lives, hopefully. And if it's not a regular part of your life, we pray that PUC can be a source of strength and a place for you to live out your purpose. And with that in mind, I will light our candle of joys and concerns, knowing that I can't mention all of those that are living out there, but we have some of our elders in challenging spots, and most of us might know who they are. I don't want to name names without permission, but let's hold the world and ourselves in our hands. Maybe not soon, but someday we'll be back to line up like we always do when people can speak their own mind. Hard times. Our prayer is from Loretta Williams. It's called An Affirmation of Hope. We bearers of the dream affirm that a new vision of hope is emerging. We pledge to work for that community in which justice will be actively present. We affirm that there is struggle yet ahead. We know that in the struggle is the hope for the future. We affirm that we are co-creators of that future, not passive pawns to it. We stand united in affirmation of our hope and vision that we can live in a just and inclusive society. We affirm the unity of all persons. We affirm that there is a brotherhood and a sisterhood that allows us to touch a common humanity, particularly this week. We affirm a unity that opens our eyes and our ears, and most importantly, our hearts, to see the different forms of oppression, suffering, and pain. And yet, in light of that pain, we affirm that there is an image that drags us forward and pulls us to celebrate the hopes for human unity. This week, in particular, we gather ourselves with the united community that we will discover the strength inside of our differences. Affirming that hope, we will express and energize and enable and pull ourselves forward. Whether they be racial, political, economic, or religious divisions, we pledge in this church, and I hope you pledge in your heart, to make our tomorrows a singular vision of joy. Let's make tomorrow, starting today, a better day. And now we take those thoughts and that resolution to prayer and Severin's beautiful meditative music. I'm going to swap the order of the reading and the sermon today. This past Wednesday afternoon, on my last day in Boston, I plopped myself down to watch a little TV while I tappity-tapped my edits for what was going to be Sunday's sermon. If you follow along in the newsletter, you would have known that the sermon was about challenging ourselves to open up our imaginations about all the theological options for how the universe might work, whether there's a God or not, what might happen in the afterlife, all of that. The sermon was, quite ironically, about expanding what we would consider possible. Never did I expect that I was about to sit down and watch an event that I really did not think was possible. I had a bowl of seasoned chickpeas in this metal bowl I eat out of a lot. I had a computer on my lap, and I sat down with the unsettling displeasure of watching a mob of people on steps of this sort of regal, seemingly public building holding signs and waving flags. Of course, it was the US Capitol. I didn't know that initially. Before I realized the setting was that, I felt like I had PBS on, and I felt like I'd probably stumbled over. It took me a couple seconds to stumbled into some BBC report about a country most of us, not named Chris Bechtel, would struggle to locate or even spell. Sadly, that spell lasted very shortly. I had been in a little bit of a news bubble and vacuum of news, and I had forgotten that January 6th was promised by the president more than a month ago to be a wild day. Within seconds, that moment clarified itself, and in addition to looking at huddled protesters on the steps of the Capitol, which threw me a little, it didn't quite figure that no one got that far normally. I found myself watching men scaling the granite walls. I'm sure you've seen that by now. And I said to myself, as I sat there, I've never seen that before. It's hard to shake me on news. I have a distance to big events that I speak about from time to time. For any of those who followed the whole assault on democracy that we saw on Wednesday from the beginning, I sat down just in time to the time when the violent shouts and the sort of flag waving had turned into broken windows and an invasion. But in the first 15 minutes I watched, it wasn't clear what had happened. It seemed that the crowd had diminished a little bit on the steps, and it was a few moments later to realize that they had broken in. Wow, I said to myself sitting there. And it just turns out they were inside the Capitol building. We saw visuals, or I saw visuals pretty quickly, of there being, a lot of Trump flags. I didn't see the Confederate flags being waved around. And for that first hour that I was glued to the TV, we saw people parading around. Most of the shots were from the outside. But over the next few hours, what would fill in are even more dramatic events that were sort of coming to us that we mostly didn't see. The person who got shot. Dramatic, violent events of the windows being broken. I'm sure I'm the 27th voice you've heard this week, or the 53rd voice, or whatever number of voices to tell you that Wednesday was sad, alarming, embarrassing, anger-provoking, and or scary, and you can prioritize those based on who you are. I agree. I suspect that you, like I, had never expected to see armed citizens rampaging into the Capitol to stop an active, engaged Congress from formalizing an election. Shocking is not strong enough a word, or an overused one at least. However, to me, and maybe I say this just to offer something different, but what struck me was just how casual so much of the mob that had just broken into the Capitol was, in a way that was oddly inexplicable and eerie at the same time. How many of these insurrectionists that had been part of a mob that had just forced their way past barricades to breach the barriers of the nation's capital were just roaming around the hallowed halls where many of the camera angles were, like tourists? Paralleling those milling about on the lawn were those that the president had suggested behave courageously 90 minutes before, trying to stop what everyone with any sanity every court and everyone who has any level of objectivity had declared to be a free election. Rather than violent insurrectionists, yet inside, mostly what I saw were people who behaved like delinquent teenagers who had snuck into school after hours and were running around the halls. It was a weird mix. Reports of a person being shot, rumors of there being pipe bombs, and news of congressional reps being hidden and tucked away in different places, locked down, mixed in with images of largely, I thought, youthful people who looked to me like they'd hidden in the bathroom stall of a museum to run around after everyone had left. I didn't get it. There are lots of other missives you might read, and there might be many more important points about this, about how the violent tweets of our president that led to this moment are treasonous. I agree. He should be impeached or censored or something, although we never know what that's going to result in. So it's hard to know exactly what to do. That's my opinion. I've seen and listened to my own fair share of reports about what white nationalists might do headed into the future on the 17th or the 16th or an inauguration, or even into the future at state capitol buildings. I agree that a third of our country that is struggling to cope with the inevitability of a changing American demographics and power dynamics is not going to grasp the reality anytime soon. Check. I'm with you. What struck me most about Wednesday was the odd calm of the response by both the police, who, as we all know, would never and have never responded so peacefully to a group of people who were mixed color or particularly black, and the insurrectionists themselves. I wanted to tap them on the shoulder. Do you realize what you've just done? There's a lot else to be said, and perhaps, again, much more important than this, but just how could these people who were at the president's request be so courageous, breaking into the heart of American democracy, be oblivious to the historic or personal consequences of what they had just done? I didn't get that they didn't get it. These brave patriots were running around and taking selfies with their feet up on esteemed senators' desks, only to go home and post those on their Facebook pages. I don't want to dismiss the future potential of any racist act or coax them on, but I believe such a response is an indication of an educational system gone crazy and can only happen to a mob that sort of feels an odd mix of privileged enough and delusional enough to have lost the historical impact of what they have done, or to think that their behavior would go unpunished. It cannot. Did they think they had won? I don't want to demean the threat that the militants present moving forward. I don't. We're in scary times. Maybe I am. But indulge me a little in the little bit of gloating. What did they think they were going to accomplish? Did they really believe that a few thousand angry people are going to end democracy as we know it? Or maybe I'm the delusional one. The act of an angry mob who baselessly challenges an American election simply because they don't like the results have obviously forgotten, or more likely never learned, how preciously hard it is for any country, any institution, to peacefully exchange power between different ideologies. It takes that combination, delusion and privilege, to commit a historic act of treason and post about it. Only people who fail to understand history would think that what they were doing was noble and not simply be an attempt to act in a video game of their own making. It seems that our president and a scary number of elected officials and these homegrown insurrectionists had failed to grasp the real privilege of what it is to be an American is not the right to own a gun or many of them, but the right to live in a place where you mostly don't need one. It seems that these people have not grasped precisely because we've established the rule of law is exactly why they were not shot the minute they crossed that first barrier. I'd love for them to pause long enough to explore the likely consequences of what might happen if they decided to try to break down the doors of the Kremlin. Just imagine that. For those who are students of history who've been part of our faithful PUC group marching through our racist past over the last 6, 7, 8 months, you probably might know that the parallels of this moment parallel 1876, about a decade after the Civil War, and in a combination of a shaky economic moment and a population tired of dealing with the costs and challenges of undoing racism, led to a backroom deal that bargained the end of Reconstruction. The parallels aren't pure, of course, but those political events were a costly compromise, one that halted the best chance we've had, till maybe now, to undo the inequality that we were promised in this country to be opposed to, but were born with. We should not, for the sake of expedience, let that happen again. We should not waver and look the way at a racist mob. Every one of us obviously has to balance a difficult task. You know, when people say, or I ask what we should preach about, these days, it's this. We're in this tough combination. We have to maintain our own peace of mind during these hard times, and we have to not forget that our democracy is under assault. That's a challenging, bipolar thing to deal with. We have to not forget that over the weekend, our very own president called the Georgia election official to see if he could find one more vote than Biden a week ago. That feels like a year ago. Nor that the first Black and Jewish man ever elected from Georgia just were. We neither have to forget that we are people in our country that believe white rule is more true to American spirit and history than our democratic process is. And we have to remember that the Black Lives Matter movements of this summer and this spring around the world were the largest mass movement in world history. We have to balance these two things. There's a lot of joy around too. We have to remember that every time there's racial progress, anytime a reckoning with our past takes place, the pervasive nature of how our country is built, there's always a revolutionary response. We should not be shocked. And we have to remember that right now, perhaps no time since the 60s, we have a chance, us now, this generation, all of us, have a chance to participate in events that will be written down in the history books. There really hasn't been a time like this. So we're all asked to figure out where we find our peace and where we find our action. We have to remember that one of the core things our crazy little religious movement with like 150,000 adults in the whole country attest to believing is that history is not fixed. You, I, nobody knows what the path forward will be. I don't know whether censuring, impeaching, or just leaving Trump alone and praying the next 2 weeks goes well is the right path. I'd like to see him impeached, but nobody knows what the right path is. Only hindsight is 2020, and that's not even 2020. What I do know is that we definitely have to guard against the fact that misinformation becomes normative, regardless of what side it is. We're in a time in which we've opened up the floodgates of who can speak in the media in a way that never was before, and it's a beautiful thing. We've never had so many people of color, so many people with disabilities getting to voice themselves, and now we also realize we have no filters. While these times are filled with things that we never have expected to see, we have to publicly ask ourselves if we could ever remember or imagine dark-skinned people invading the Congress with such a passive response from the security forces, or such a passive preparation from the security forces. Just think about that. Think about that movement outside if they were Black radicals from the 60s or Black Lives Matter people from today. Don't have to ask you to imagine that it would probably be different. And obviously very clumsy and logistically challenging is what we're going to do about policing this present leader of our country for the next whatever days are left, 13 or something. Imagine for a minute if Trump was not the leader of the free world, but a black man with an afro. What would the response be to a person of color who addressed a large gathering of people just 90 minutes before they were scaling the walls of Congress, breaking windows and forcing their way into the heart of democracy to invade the very place that the votes were taking place? Back here in the South Bay, we have to likewise acknowledge that what it would be like if we thought that the person cutting down our Black Lives Matter sign was a black person cutting down a different kind of sign. There might be more police presence to that, I suspect. Reinhold Niebuhr, noted scholar, said the most famous thing he ever said was, "Nothing that is worth doing can ever be achieved in your lifetime." I love that. Takes the pressure off, doesn't it? Therefore, he follows up, we must be saved by hope. We have to hold the wheel steady while we increasingly work to widen the circle of care and concern. We have to widen the care of concern for whom the people in this nation deems worthy to listen to. And every response we've seen from Trump and every right radical is exactly because we've been successful. Think about the Georgia election. Think about the numbers of people at the Black Lives Matter rallies. I'm going to close this sermon by reading what the UU Association put on their webpage just the day after this event. Here goes. The Unitarian Universalist Association joins leaders across the country in calling for the immediate removal of Donald Trump as U.S. president. We call on the Vice President and every cabinet member to invoke the 25th Amendment and that Congress pursue articles of impeachment for the protection, safety, and stability of our country. President Trump has violated his oath to defend the Constitution, engaged in illegal and seditious acts, undermined a peaceful transition of power, and put the country and its leaders and people in danger. As a religious institution, we live faithfully as our role to be part of the critical fabric of our country's moral conscience. And as UUs, we hold democracy as a central principle of our faith. We're compelled by the events of this week to call the actions what they were, attempts at insurrection, to overthrow a duly elected government. This is a time for true accountability and courageous action in pursuit of a more just, equitable, multiracial, and pluralistic democracy. Amen. Amen. We don't know the future. We don't know what will happen or what the right course of events will be, but that's a strong statement, and I agree with it. I'd like to close with a reading from Clarissa Pinkola Estes, titled, "We Were Made for These Times." My friends, she says, do not lose heart. We were made for these times. I urge you not to spend your spirit dry by bewailing these difficult times, especially do not lose hope. Struggling souls catch light from other souls who are fully lit and willing to show it. If you would help calm the tumult, this is one of the strongest things you can do. There will always be times when you feel discouraged. I too have felt despair in many times of my life, but I do not keep a chair for it. I will not entertain it. It is not allowed to eat from my plate. What is needed for dramatic change is an accumulation of acts, adding one more and continuing on. We know that it does not take everyone on earth to bring justice, but only a small, determined group who will not give up during the first, second, or 100th gale. One of the most calming and powerful actions you can do to intervene in a stormy world is to stand up and show your soul. The light of a soul throws sparks that can send up flares, build signal fires, and causes proper matters to catch fire. To display the lantern of soul in shadowy times like this, to be fierce and to show mercy, both are acts of immense bravery and the greatest necessity. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but stretching out to mend the part of the world that is within our reach. Any small calm thing that one soul can do to help another soul, to assist some portion of this poor, suffering world will help immensely. It is not given to us to know which acts or by whom will cause the critical mass to tip towards an enduring good. Wise words, words of encouragement. Amen. Please give generously for the life and work of this church and enjoy Severin's melodic tones.
Georgia, Georgia, the whole day through. Just an old sweet song keep Georgia on my mind. Georgia, Georgia, the song of you comes as sweet and clear as moonlight through the pine. Other arms reach out for me, other eyes smile tenderly, but in peaceful dreams I see the road leads back to you. Georgia, Georgia, no peace I find. Just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia, Georgia, no peace I find. Just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind.
This church, as we say, is dedicated to the proposition that behind all of our differences, beneath all of our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together. In spite of time and death and the space between the stars, I love that part, we pause in silent witness to that unity. I love that thought. May the blessing of love be upon you. May love's peace abide with you. May love's presence illuminate your hearts now and forevermore. So be it. Amen. Shalom. Salam. Namaste. Blessed be all those holy words. And now, as we have come to steal from the Quakers in the best Unitarian tradition possible, it is now that our service truly begins. Go in peace. Be peace. Today we return with the 1 o'clock call around racial deeper dive, and join us if you would. Thanks.
you.